What's up, and welcome back to the show, Lawn and Light. We're gonna jump right in like we always do, not dilly-dally. Let's get to the learning. I get this question a lot, and I've hesitated to ever answer it. I think I've answered it one other time. The reason I haven't answered it is because I am not an electrician. We talked a little bit about that in the last episode, but I can break down a few things for you and let you make your decision. Disclaimer, this is all on you. Don't come back and blame me if you screw this up. All right, here we go. How many bulbs can you put on a line? Well, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked. Let's start with a little bit of an electrical lesson, okay? When you plug into something at your house, it's 120 volts, right? That's how many volts are going to run through your body if you put a male and a male together and shock yourself. 120 volts. If it's a 15 amp breaker, just multiply those, and that gives you 1800. That's watts. That's like the max watts you can put on that. If it's a 20 amp breaker, multiply 120 times 20 amps, and that is 2400 watts. Now, what are our bulbs? Let me grab one. On each bulb, it says how many watts it is. So if we had a 15 amp breaker, we had 1800 watts to work with, right? You got to watch the rest of this video so that we can get to the part that matters, right? So if you look at the bulb, it says on each bulb how many watts it is. It's right here. You're not going to be able to see it, but it's right here. And it's hard to read, but this one says 0.58 watts. Well, if that's the case, if every bulb is 0.58 watts, then on a 15 amp breaker, that would say that I could put, if you 1800 divided by 0.58 is 3103 bulbs. If it's a 20 amp breaker, 2400 divided by 0.58 equals 4137 bulbs. Well, does that sound right? Like, can you put 3100 bulbs on a line? Have you ever heard anybody doing that? It doesn't sound right because you should never do that. That's max capacity of that breaker, not the socket line. And I don't have a roll with me. But the socket line has specifications on how much of a load that it can handle. If you look on the side of the reel, it comes on like a reel. If you look on the side of it, it'll have a sticker. It should have a sticker like this. Not my notes, this little sticker right here. Okay, and that's going to tell you the max lamps that you can put on there. It's going to give you an example right here, top one. It says if a bulb is 1 watt, then the max lamps is 952. That means that that line can handle 952 watts. It's more about this wire than it is about the bulbs. You're just using the bulbs to get to the calculation. If that bulb is 5 watts, which none of them are going to be 5 watts, a lot of these calculations are for incandescent lights, and this is why we don't use incandescent lights. If somebody asks you to use incandescent lights, just tell them, hey, we only do LED. It's as simple as, they're safer, they're more cost efficient, they're not more cost efficient for the customer, but they're more energy efficient. They're easier for you to install. If you've never tried to put up incandescent lights, don't. Just stick with LEDs and your life will be much, much more rewarding. So the next one is a 5 watt example. You can put 190 bulbs on there. We're going to go off the first example. At 952, if they're a 1 watt bulb. I would still not put that. We don't. The max bulbs that we'll put ever on something is 500. If your house is bigger than that, then you're installing, then you want to go back to power with another line. So let me just give you a real world example. Let's say you're doing the front of a house, okay? And it's a big long house from the front. And you're going to do the front trim and ridges, so the lower line and the upper lines. A good rule of thumb is just to separate those lines and go back to the timer. Your timer, the timers that we have 2 plug-ins on the bottom of them. And just to put it simply, think about the thickness of the wire and what it can handle. This wire for your Christmas lights, SPT1, is 18 gauge. Okay, that's a small wire. The wire that comes out of your timer is probably a 16 or a 14 gauge. And then the wire in the wall is probably a 14 or 16 gauge, something like that. So that's bigger. The lower the number, the bigger the actual wire. What we'll do is, if it's a long house, we'll run the front trim line, which is like gutters and front peaks, back to the timer and plug into the timer, okay? And then we'll run the ridge lines back to the timer and plug into the timer. It's 2 separate lines. They're not tied together. They're not looped together. And they go back to power. The thing that you also have to consider on where you're plugging in is, yeah, you could max this out to the 952 bulbs, or in our case, it would be closer to 1600 bulbs, because this is a 1 watt example and ours is a 0.58, so it would be 1600 or 1700 bulbs. The more bulbs you put on there, the more that wire heats up, especially in Texas. You already have outside heat that's hot too. So we just want to be safe, right? Don't do anything over a limit of what you think that wire could handle. It's going to heat up, and then if it heats up, it's going to short. And then if your breakers don't catch a short, then it could start a fire. That's what happens. First thing it'll do is melt your plugs together, and then it could get bad. I've seen a few where we had every plug melted on the house and the breaker finally tripped. Well, we don't want to get to that point. But the other thing that has to be a consideration is, wherever you're plugging in, you don't know what else is plugged into that breaker, to that system. So we've had several jobs where we'll plug in and we'll have 300 or 400 bulbs on a line, and it'll trip. And the first thing you go to doing is you're checking your lines. You're checking your males and females. There's occasionally a vampire plug got bent, and something could happen, right, where those 2 wires are touching. You didn't cut your ends correctly before you put them in the plug, and they touched and they tripped. So those are the first things that you're checking. If you check your whole line then and nothing's wrong, then something else is going on, and it's probably the timer or the breaker. So you can replace the timer first, see if it trips again, and then it could be the breaker. Well, it could be that line has a big load on it. That could be the same breaker that's tied to the garage where a refrigerator is plugged in. We've had that happen, and it keeps tripping. It trips once, and we can't find where to reset it. We go to the breaker box, and it's not tripped there, which means it's a GFI, and can't find the GFI, so it was behind the fridge, because whoever installed the electrical system at that house ran a bunch of stuff on one line. Does that make sense? You're not going to deal with this on many projects, but the troubleshooting of, if you have to deal with it, you just have to work from your stuff back to their stuff. Your lines, your bulbs, your lights, your males and females, back to their plug, their GFIs, their breaker. It's one at a time. If you can't figure it out, you have to start at the end of your line, at that last female. We've even had one time where it was a socket. A socket got crushed, somebody stepped on it, and the wires were touching inside the socket. That's a hard one to find. We traced down everything, and it was the last thing that we traced down. It was the second to last socket on a line that was about 200 feet long. So you got to have some critical thinking skills to problem solve and work that problem back. Hey, thanks for joining us today. Remember, love God, love others. Let your work reflect that. I'm going to catch you on the next one.